So let's talk about the ensorcelled automata of the Dusty Battle line of Tzeentch, with an overview of the Rubric Marines, the Scarab Occult Terminators, and their dedicated detachment in Codex Thousand Suns. These guys are looking even more dangerous than they were before, and they're cheaper as well. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Thousand Suns, and specifically Rubric Marines for this video, talking about their new datasheet and rules, how much damage they do, and taking a look at their support options with their character choices and their dedicated detachment. The Rubric Marines are of course the Dusty Battle line of the Thousand Suns, basically the result of a great incantation to stop Tzeentch's mutations from ravaging the Legion. The Rubric of Ahriman transformed most of the Legion into little more than sorcerers automata, clanking forward into battle at the whim of the Psykers of the Thousand Suns. All that remains of the men inside now just dust, animated by magic. Not being able to be injured or damaged in the normal sense, they're notably hard to kill, and the Psykers are able to fill their bolt guns and special weapons with ensorcelled munitions. Deadly Inferno bolts are far better at punching through armour than the counterparts of other Space Marine armies, and for dealing with mass infantry they can be deployed with the Tzeentchian fire of Warp Flamers. The models themselves are maybe some of the most iconic out of the Thousand Suns army. It's basically these guys and the sorcerers are the ones that you think of when you think Thousand Suns. Basically Space Marines with their Egyptian style aesthetic, particularly those rather cool blue and yellow striped sort of headdress type things. They can take quite a long time to paint up and get looking nice, though I feel like both the Rubrics and the Scarab Occult Terminators are pretty good models for their money as far as 40k goes, getting you some fairly cool miniatures and quite dangerous ones that cost a fair few points in game. They do help make Thousand Suns a slightly cheaper faction to collect than most. I have a feeling that a fair few people might have joined the faction in the wake of Space Marine 2 and seen the sorcery of the Thousand Suns in action there. As ever, if you're looking to pick up some Thousand Suns models, feel free to check out the discount retailers linked down in the video description. They can save a bit of money on Warhammer purchases depending on where you are around the world, between 10 to 20% or so, and anything bought through those helps to support the channel. Let's get into it though and talk about the datasheet of the Rubric Marines and the Scarab Occult Terminators in Codex Thousand Suns. I feel like they've got a bunch of changes that have made them really quite interesting, and quite feel-good ones going from the index to the codex. As per those digital points leaks that we got earlier in the week, it seems that the Rubric Marines are going to be 100 points for 5 of them, or 190 per 10, a lower cost on the bigger units because you get the Sorcerer in the smaller one. To make the squad a bit more efficient, I suppose, that's dropping 10 points on both squad sizes from pre-codex. For their core stat line, they've had a few changes. They're still toughness 4 Space Marines with a 5+ invulnerable save, and they're OC2 for a bit more weight on objectives than some things, though they've had the improvement of going up to movement 6 from 5, which is a nice enough boost, particularly for the Warp Flamers with their limited range. And then interestingly enough, they've had their aspiring sorcerer separated out onto his own stat block. He now has 3 wounds to offer, and now he's the one who gives them leadership 6+. If he's slain before the rest of them are, then they're only leadership 7, I guess to represent them not having a psychic guide. The standard Space Marine stat lines, even with the 5+ invulnerable save, I wouldn't say that they're standout tough, at least not for their points cost, but they aren't absolutely terrible against small arms and might occasionally bounce some high AP fire. They do have an unrestricted use of the Cabal of Sorcerers special rule, so they can cast those rituals and potentially tank some of the mortal wounds on Rubric Marines as opposed to the Psyker themselves, so it could be a good choice for casting things and using the 3d6 to do so. Where they really stand out though is their damage output. They still have the choice of arming the squad between Inferno bolt guns or Warp Flamers, though now the gap seems to have narrowed really quite a lot with their datasheet update. The Warp Flamers haven't really changed too much. They'll still get d6 shots each at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1 and ignoring cover, and their special rule allows them to reroll wound rolls fully against things on objectives, though the Warp Flamers I guess have had a small nerf in that they no longer get the Icon of Flame benefit, so they won't get extra AP on 6s. The Inferno bolt guns have caught up quite a way though. Now the Icon of Flame gives them ignore cover, so they'll be ignoring cover in the same way that the Warp Flamers do, and even on top of that they've got an extra AP -1 as well. The Inferno bolt guns now strike at AP 2. Those seem like pretty sensible changes, given that the bolt guns were just so far behind in terms of damage output that people didn't tend to take them. Now things do feel at least considerably closer. Otherwise, they also get the Mighty Soul Reaper cannon, 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 2 now, so boosted there, and devastating wounds, and they also get to reroll the wound rolls, so you might get some more devastating wounds out of that. And the Psyker's Warp Smite might have lost pistol, but now has 3 attacks and 24-inch range as well, so again more threat. I guess it means that you wouldn't be able to fire it at the same time as their pistol weapon though, you'd have to pick and choose. Overall they're pretty savage damage output though, and they grant that Bringers of Change rule to attached characters. And given the Thousand Sun Psykers have some fairly punchy psychic attacks, being able to fully reroll wound rolls with things like an Infernal Master is really good. I was interested to see some comparisons with bolters versus flamers. This one is just on their very basic stats, ignoring a lot of buffs that they could get, but it still basically seems that against the majority of targets, the bolters are either the same damage or worse. These numbers are against an average guy in the squad firing against something or an objective, so getting the full wound rerolls, it looks like the two are around about even if they take aim at 2+ save things, but otherwise the warp flamers are around about plus 50% on their damage output, all other things being equal. Both of them do have some other advantages though. The warp flamers can overwatch really well, and they could be a particularly good thing to target the Twist of Fate with. Having those go up to AP3 ignored cover is very scary, whereas the bolters do have their advantages as well. They've got the longer range, they can use better buffs from things like the Infernal Master and the hit roll things for the Rhino, and also the psychic power to get reroll hits of one or all hits. Feels like warp flamers might still be a pretty reasonable choice in a squad that isn't having too much synergy put on it, but given there's lots of things that can help out the hit roll, bolters seem very viable now. Either way, the squad's still really quite scary. This is just base damage for a squad against a unit on an objective with warp flamers and a Soul Reaper cannon. Against anything infantry related with that Soul Reaper cannon and the sorcerer's attacks on the go, you're going to take down a fair few wounds of them, clearing out entire squad's worth of hordes, or around about 4 Space Marines or 6 Terminators, a bit of help done by the devastating wounds there of the Soul Reaper and the Psyker. It's only really vehicles and things they're generally going to need some extra buffs if they want to be efficient against them. Overall, the squad does look much improved in the new codex in my opinion. Before we move on to Scarab Occult Terminators, characters, and the Rubricae Phalanx, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, which is Ladder Creative with their battle mat and terrain sets. These guys are a relatively new wargame terrain and supplies company who wanted to share their first 2 creations, die-cut ruins terrain and a battle map marked out with deployment zones for Warhammer 40k all ready to go. Compared with competitors out there, these are at pretty reasonable prices, $160 for the terrain set, which compared with a board from Games Workshop is quite a lot less and pretty competitive with other makers out there. You get all this stuff in the set with 4 big ruins, 6 smaller ones, and some armoured containers, or WTC compliant if you want to do tournament things with it. The look and feel of it is pretty nice as well. It comes pre-printed and pre-coloured as you can see from these sheets here, and makes a pretty fun moody looking battlefield. Here's it all put together on a table by way of example. As well as that, they've also got a battle mat on sale too, made of synthetic leather with an anti-slip bottom and being sold on their website and Amazon Prime for $80. A grid layout to help with terrain setup, and then Pariah Nexus deployment zones pre-marked out to help speed up games. Here's a top-down view of it to better see the design. If either of those sound interesting, feel free to check them out. There'll be links down in the video description, and they ship free both to the USA and UK. I'll link their website and Amazon page down below. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to the all-important automata though, let's go on to the Scarab Occult Terminators, and as per the leaks that we saw earlier, there are 180 points per 5 of them, or 375 for a squad of 10, so more for a bigger unit there. I guess Games Workshop trying to put a premium on massive combos and big stratagem efficiency affecting quite such an enormous unit. These guys got a pretty similar stat line to before, fairly standard Terminator things, moving 5 inches with toughness 5, 3 wounds, a 2+ save and 4+ invulnerable, and as with the power armoured equivalents they've also got a sorcerer leader who's got +1 wound, and he's the one that provides the extra leadership. The Scarab Occult Terminators got a little bit more durable as well against small arms fire. They previously had their Implacable Guardians rule only give you a -1 to wound against things that had higher strength than your toughness. Now it just works against everything. So anything strength 3 or 4 is basically going to be no threat to them, only wounding you on a 6, and strength 5 is only going to be wounding you on a 5 as well. It really means that you're going to need strength 6 and above if you're going to put any sort of dent in these guys. For their damage output, without the rerolls they're not going to be quite so punchy as the regular rubrics, but they did also get the very nice bonus of the extra AP on their Inferno combi bolters, and the same for the Soul Reaper cannon as well. With the buff, that's likely to put the Soul Reaper cannon even further ahead of the heavy warp flamer, which I think it was ahead already really. And then you can still take the 2 Hellfire missile racks in the unit. Seems that they haven't changed. There were some rumours that they might be getting blast, but it still seems to be the 2 attacks at strength 10 and damage 3 for some big punchy anti-tank shots. The Psyker's attack still gets warp smite as well, and with no pistol keyword on this one, this will be able to be fired at the same time as an Inferno combi bolter, so quite a shooty sorcerer indeed I suppose. Then when they make melee, they're one of the Fighty 1000 Suns units, 3 attacks at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, quite a nice anti-space marine profile. They'll quite enjoy the lethal hits of a Scarab Occult Terminator to be able to allow them to punch up against big stuff. Overall they also seem improved, better AP on their shooting attacks, a better durability rule, an extra wound on the sorcerer, all generally seem like good things. and maybe being a bit more useful for the faction mechanic now wouldn't hurt them. They often tended to get passed over just as it was more efficient to take small units of rubrics with sorcerers to maximise cabal points, but that's not really a factor, and these guys again will be quite good at casting rituals given that you can tank some mortal wounds on a Terminator. I guess that's still not super ideal, but better than a very expensive character if you're going to lose wounds on something. Next up, let's go through Sorceress Leaders for the units, just with a quick rundown of the units and what they can do. Ahriman can allow you to redeploy units and has a boost to cast, but doesn't really do so much directly for the units themselves. It perhaps feels more useful to have in the army more so for things like infiltrators, or perhaps Risen Rubricae, more of a draw than being a leader in his own right. The Exalted Sorcerer gets Astral Blast as a fairly punchy Witchfire. He costs 80 points, and he's the one that you want if you want to make the Rubricae tankier. He'll give Rubric Marines a 4+ invulnerable save and the ability to heal them. Really not too bad, particularly for a bigger squad that might have a bit more chance of taking casualties and then surviving to resurrect rubrics from beyond the grave. His damage will quite like the inbuilt rerolls as well. The Exalted Sorcerer on disc is an extra 20 points. He is now the one that gets the sort of pseudo-lone operative protection. You can't shoot them within 18 inches if he's in the unit. He gets a similar sort of profile as the previous, but with a torrent profile so it auto hits, and that'll still slow down enemy units. Between that, he does feel like quite a fun leader for the squad. Then we've got the regular Sorcerer for 75 points as the cheapest leader. He might be a bit more tempting for the bolter rubrics now he has lethal hits. Certainly feels like there's a lot more draw to using him if that's happening. His damage output isn't quite so exciting though, with a bunch of damage 1 attacks, though he does get a fun special rule where he gets to add +3 to the number of attacks and the strength of that once per game if he'd like to, if it doesn't make more sense to use it on melee. Finally for the rubrics, there's the Infernal Master. He's 85 points and still comes with a pretty punchy Psychic Flame attack, 2d6 Strength 6, AP2 and Damage 1 attacks. They again will really enjoy the rubrics rerolls, and he grants Sustain Hits 1 to the unit, which now might make you think a lot more about taking the bolters over the flamers potentially. They have fairly similar damage outputs when that's on the go, and the bolters get longer range. Rubrics might quite enjoy being with him in the Grand Conclave as well, when he can get +1 damage, and potentially devastating wounds as well, and that's definitely a profile that will quite enjoy rerolling wound rolls. Finally for leaders, we've got the Terminator Sorcerer. He grants the unit lethal hits, which is pretty nice with all those AP2 combi bolters, and otherwise chips in a bit of shooting himself, a bit of melee with his force weapon, and also marks a unit for a +1 to hit, now with his psychic shooting attack. That could be helpful for buffing the combi bolters, or maybe some big heavy guns from Thousand Suns vehicles, though it's perhaps a little bit annoying that he can't affect the shooting of his own unit anymore. He did drop in points cost quite significantly though, down to 85 points. It does still seem like if you're taking Scarab Occult Terminators, it does make sense to have him as an add-on to them. Finally, and very relevant for getting the Rubric Marines into battle, is the Thousand Suns Rhino. This one's reportedly going up to 90 points from 75, though it gained a bit of AP on its combi bolters, and more importantly a fun psychic buffing rule. When units get out of it and it shoots the targets to mark it, you then get +1 to hit and wound with your psychic weapons for squads that got out. So you could have a sorcerer with their Astral Blast or something hitting on a 2+ and then +1 to wound, and it should also buff the squad psyker weapon as well. Between that and the inbuilt squad rerolls, you'd have Thousand Suns psykers taking massive chunks out of anything in the game. So really not too bad extra utility on top of getting the Thousand Suns where they need to be in the first place. Moving on though, let's take a look at the dedicated detachment for the Rubric Marines, and this one's the Rubricae Phalanx, and entirely focuses on the Dusty Battle line of the Thousand Suns, and I think was always going to be an interesting one to people collecting the army. The core rule for this one sees the return of All Is Dust, basically Rubricae models, so that Scarabs and Rubric Marines get a +1 to their armor saves if they're attacked by damage 1 attacks. As a core detachment rule, I think it's an alright one, but not super great. You're still going to fail on a 1, so the Scarab Occult Terminators often won't care too much if they're in cover or the attack doesn't have much AP, and given that a lot of damage 1 attacks are low strength anyway, they probably weren't going to be wounding the Scarab Occult Terminators very reliably anyway. Could be handy enough to make Rubric Marines just a bit more indomitable against small arms though, but in general these two units tend to fear more damage 2 or damage 3 weapons more so than damage 1. For the stratagems for the Rubricae Phalanx, first up for 1 command point we've got Ardent Automata. This one allows you to fall back, shoot and charge for a Rubricae unit declared in the movement phase. I feel like for both units that's really quite handy. They're generally going to want to get close to do their best damage output, maybe particularly deliver Psykers in so they can deliver their damage too. Warp Flamers are wanting to be on the front lines, and Scarab Occult Terminators might want to be in rapid fire and get their melee to work. being able to fall back, potentially shoot something else, and then charge a unit, or even the same one that you just disengaged from, that's a really powerful ability, and I feel like this one absolutely will come up. For one command point, there's Inexorable Advance. This one allows you to ignore modifiers to this Rubricae unit's move, and also gain the Assault keyword. So if you've got a unit trying to advance towards an objective, or to just get in range with Warp Flamers or something, then there's a good chance that you get a lot more movement out of this. And again, I feel like it'll have a pretty good chance of being worth the command point occasionally. Interesting that you could potentially combine this with the Temporal Surge ritual as well, so you could have a squad move 6 inches, plus up to an extra 6 from this, and then another 6 from Temporal Surge. That's quite a lot of movement and still being able to shoot. For one command point, there's Infernal Fusillade, and one Psychic keyword unit gets Inferno Bolt weapons to become Strength 5 and gain the Psychic keyword, so that's a boost from Strength 4 to Strength 5 for the Rubric or the Scarab Bolters there. Against a lot of targets, that'll be a direct +1 to wound, and the Psychic keyword could allow some other fun shenanigans as well. The main one being with the Rhino, you could have Rubric Marines jump out of that, and then suddenly be hitting on 2s with a +1 to wound on top of that strength boost, and it feels like that one with a big squad of Rubric Marines with bolt guns is the way to go there. That one does feel strong enough to build around. Next up, for one command point, we have the fun name in the Revenge of the Rubricae. When a Psyker model gets shot and killed in the enemy shooting phase, a Rubricae unit within 6 inches of the destroyed Psyker can immediately shoot at the unit that just killed it. I guess this one's going to be a bit on the situational side really. I'm sure you'd lose Psykers, but you probably wouldn't want to set up to plan to use them. Though I guess if you have multiple units fighting side by side, it might just happen anyway. You're just going to have to make a judgment call whenever it is an option. A lot of the time it just wouldn't really make sense due to a unit maybe being too big and tough to bother with, or the Rubric Marine that you could do it with just doesn't have enough damage output left. Every so often though it could matter in really quite a big way and add quite a lot of damage. For 2 command points there's Implacable Guardians, and that one's -1 damage for a Rubric Marine Psyche unit that's been shot by an enemy in their shooting phase. Enemy attacks are -1 damage against that unit, against things besides the Psyker models that don't get it, so basically you'd want to use that when you can reduce damage 2 attacks down to damage 1. Seems that Games Workshop's preview of that one was wrong on 2 accounts there. Doesn't look like it affects the Scarab Occult Terminators at all, and it can't be used to trigger the Detachment rule either, as that's listed as unmodified damage of 1. It still could be useful though. Occasionally it could basically halve the amount of Rubric Marines that you take as casualties, though at a big 2 command points it feels a bit niche. Finally, for 1 command point, there's Unwavering Phalanx. This one's another durability one, and 1 Rubric Marine unit gets -1 to wound when the enemy charges it this turn. That one feels a bit better value really, getting a similar sort of debuff to the Scarab Occult I suppose. Overall though, some pretty helpful supporting stratagems. I think the advance and shoot and the fall back and shoot ones are both ones that will come up with the Rubric Marine firepower really quite a lot. The bolter one does seem genuinely worth using with a Rhino, and the other 3 on this page I feel like also could be worth it, but maybe a little bit more situational. Finally, for the detachment, we've got the enhancements, and first up we have the return of Risen Rubricae, 30 points for a character to take this, and at the start of the declare battle formation step, you grant this to 2 Rubric Marine units or 1 Scarab Occult Terminator unit, and that squad gains Infiltrate. Because you do it at the start of the phase, I think that would mean that you can do it before attached characters, so it would basically prevent those units having any sorcerers in them. It's definitely interesting enough, though, to grant Infiltrate to Rubric Marines for essentially 15 points per squad. They're a pretty nice unit to have in the midfield with some good OC and potentially good Overwatch as well. And Scarab Occult are definitely a big threatening unit. You could have them tucked away in a mid-board ruin. I guess you just have to weigh them up against the Sekitar robots that can do that already with their Infiltrate and would cost cheaper than either. It definitely seems interesting on paper though. For a much cheaper 5 points, there's Arcane Thralls. That gives you reroll Battleshock tests for Rubricae units within 6 inches. It's not exactly the biggest buff in the world, but for 5 points I feel like that's reasonable enough for a Psyker in the middle of a formation. Definitely seems a nice one for a points filler if you can't fill the last few points. For 15 points we've got Lord of the Rubricae. This one's +1 to hit for Rubricae models in the bearer's-led unit. That seems pretty well auto-include for a Scarab Occult unit. Getting them to hit on a 2+ at range and melee is a big deal for 15 points. Could certainly be decent enough with the bolters as well. You could have them hitting on 2s with lethal hits with a standard sorcerer for example. And then finally for 20 points we've got a Stave Abominus. This one has to be taken by a Thousand Suns infantry model, and they gain sustained hits D3 and devastating wounds on their melee attacks, so unusually fighty there. It feels on paper probably better on a Scarab Occult sorcerer versus one of the others, just because that squad is a bit more comfortable winding up in close combat. I guess it does make them at least fairly significantly more threatening, though maybe not a melee powerhouse in their own right. Feels sort of usable, but maybe not crazy standout when it's 20 points perhaps. I guess in theory you could combo it on the regular sorcerer with their damage buff once per game, where they get extra attacks and extra strength. Overall feels like there's enough here to be a pretty fun detachment. Some good support options for Rubric Marines stomping around and dealing out some sorcerer's firepower, and in particular the base battle line ones do feel like a pretty standout unit in the new codex, between a few useful changes and going down in points. There's definitely plenty of other things that can help out in the codex with the rubrics and their attached sorcerers though. Several of the rituals feel really relevant for them as big central damage dealer combos for the codex. There's that one where you can mark a unit for reroll hits of 1 or reroll all hit rolls. That could be pretty solid with the Inferno Bolters, and maybe particularly if you have sustained or lethal hits on the go even more. The Twist of Fate for debuffing enemy AP is pretty massive for Warp Flamers. Even the lower version of that could increase their damage output by a pretty huge amount. Could be worth throwing the 3d6 at that one with the Squad Psyker, and the Temporal Surge for the double move and still being able to shoot is all very nice as well. Both the Scarabs and the regular Rubrics want to be within 12 inches to fire if they can be, and that could certainly help get them there. Otherwise, besides their themed detachment, other detachments can also add a lot, maybe the Grand Conclave being the next most obvious one for them. Lots of things to help out Squad Psychers, and given that they'll often have Rubric guards, and adding their special rule into the damage output, that's all very nice for them. As mentioned, they get on well with the boosted damage Infernal Master, and the Umbralific Crystal can have them warping around the table as well, potentially in the late game. The Demon Detachment has some options for them as well, some nice stratagems and a 4+ invulnerable save. Overall, at least at first impressions of the codex, the standard Dusty Thousand Suns are looking really quite strong. Feels like they were already pretty good, and they've gotten both more dangerous and cheaper. And their themed detachment still looks very interesting on paper. Nice to see the Inferno Bolters actually having some good use as well. Overall, at first impressions, I'd still say that Rubrics still feel like they're probably better than Scarabs, at least for a first take. Hopefully with their different offering with their actual bit of melee, and the Terminator Sorcerer datasheet looking fairly good, they'll still have enough to justify them. Let me know how you'd rate the difference between the Scarabs versus the regular Rubrics at the moment from first impressions of the book. I'll leave that there for now though. A big thank you to Ladder Creative with their battle mass and terrain sets for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look at their stuff. As mentioned, they ship free to the USA and UK. I'll leave that there for now though. Hopefully the next video should be the Thousand Suns Codex review. I'll try and have that out as soon as possible, so I look forward to seeing you guys then. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this with new 40k videos each day, and check out all the stuff in the video description if you'd like to support channel Patreon pages or the affiliate discount retailers around the world. In any case though, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.